The left ventricular assist device, also known as LVAD, is an absolutely marvelous piece of technology that can certainly give you access to both life and living. But is it the best way to get to your final destination? Is it the best way to live life to its fullest? That's what we're going to talk about and the difficult decision behind deciding such today on the Transplant Helper. Stay tuned. Hey folks, welcome back to the Transplant Helper again today. My name is Jim Merle, and once again today I was perusing one of my favorite transplant groups, that is the Heart Transplant Families U.S. Support Group, and I found this question being asked by a man named John. Here's what it says. My wife has an LVAD. She is 63, and we are struggling about having a transplant. How difficult are both the procedure and the recovery? He also asked, how is it knowing that you have no immune system? And then he adds he'll be praying for each of us in the group and is thankful for potential answers. Now, I'll say up front, this one already has a ton of answers, and I'm definitely appreciative for that. I kind of read through the comments so far. Wonderful answers being offered, but the gist of all of them comes down to one thing, and that is everyone is different, and it's a hard decision to make. I agree with that 1,000%. Everyone, every situation is going to be slightly different, and yes, this is a very, very difficult decision to be made. However, it is one that needs to be made, perhaps even one that should be made. Okay, now let's discuss to begin with what an LVAD is. That left ventricular assist device. Basically, it's just a device that's going to come in, it's going to assist your heart in pumping. I have entire videos that explain that, how it works, shows even a diagram of how they go about working and such. There's no need for that. It's going to assist your heart in pumping. It actually gives you a chance, an opportunity at both life and living, as I like to say it. Now, generally speaking, the LVAD is used for primarily two different purposes. On the one hand, probably the main purpose is going to be as a bridge to transplant. That's exactly what it sounds like it is. They put the LVAD in, that buys you time, that buys you opportunity to wait on transplant. The average wait time for a heart transplant basically right now is somewhere in the neighborhood of about 18 months. Now, that's totally dependent on where you end up being ranked on the transplant list, whether you're way at the very top as a status 1 or further down the list at a 2, 3, 4, or 5, such as that. That's going to definitely judge and relate that time. And the sicker you are, the higher you are up on the transplant list, and the faster you will get to transplant. That's just a given. And someone who has an LVAD basically kind of gets an automatic listing fairly near the top. Not necessarily always a status 1. That would be someone in the hospital, say on an ECMO device, but at least with an LVAD, you can hover around that status 3 or higher and get access to that transplant a little bit more readily. So as far as that, that's the bridge to transplant. Now, the second reason why LVAD is often used is not for a bridge to transplant, but for what is referred to as destination therapy. Now, I do a bridge this direction, I do destination this way. What destination therapy is, it's not to look forward to transplant, but it is only for the purpose of giving you life and at least the successful profitable life that you might desire for a period of time up until the end, or what we might call the final destination or death. Okay, that's not a good way to think about it, but that's what it is. They're giving you enough life to live out your life, basically. It's not intended to get you to any other place than to get you through this life. So that's kind of the result of the destination therapy. So that are your only two options as to why they would use an LVAD: one bridge to transplant, one destination therapy. Okay, that's basically it. Now, which one is better? Well, the answer is your situation is going to dictate which one might be better for you. I can remember back when I was awaiting transplant, and this has been really 10, 15 years ago, basically from the beginning until I finally got it. And now here we are 10 years post. But when I was waiting for transplant, basically someone like your wife, as you say, age 63, would have barely even been a candidate for transplant. As a matter of fact, the cutoff age back then was a straight up 65 years old. If you were older than 65, you weren't even going to have the opportunity for transplant to begin with. So this destination therapy would have been the only way to do things. There would have been no other options. Now, thankfully, shortly as I was getting my transplant around 2013, 2014, 15, they kind of changed the game, okay? They began to offer transplants to people who were older than 65, and in some cases, much older than 65. I had two friends, as a matter of fact, that I know personally, one who received his heart transplant at 72, another who received it at 75, and they're 10 years post now as well. So they're 82 and 85, and they're doing great, but they would have not had that opportunity just a few years years prior to that, if you go back to say 2010, they wouldn't have even had the opportunity. So the fact that you're 63 and they're giving you an LVAD already, and they're even talking about transplant, that's a wonderful thing within itself. So just think about that as a wonderful, wonderful blessing. But it doesn't change the fact that it can be a very difficult decision to make. Now, he asked a few questions here I want to address directly. One, he asked about the procedure itself, how difficult it was, and the recovery. Well, the answer to that is, if she's already had an LVAD, the procedure itself is very similar, not exactly the same, but as far as how invasive it is, having to crack that sternum, go in full open heart, that's exactly the same. And for the most part, the recovery is very, very similar, okay? I've actually had people, a number of people who I've talked to with LVADs, and even those who have had LVADs recently, they always say the same thing. If they've ended up having an LVAD later, a transplant, most of them say this: the LVAD was more difficult. It was harder to get used to. It was harder to recover from, thus and so. And so transplant can be, I don't know exactly why, I can't explain it, but for whatever reason, transplant recovery can be a little bit easier than the LVAD. So I would encourage you to reach out to people more than you that have gone through the process from LVAD to transplant, that transformation, and ask them. But I think most of them will tell you, for whatever reason, the LVAD was harder to deal with and recover from than the transplant itself. Now, as far as general transplant recovery, your main issues are going to come up for a few things. One, there's a very high risk after the surgery itself. As a matter of fact, those first few days or first few hours at least are going to be extremely touch and go. They got to make sure that organ that was attached, that was transplanted, is functioning properly. They're going to do a lot of things to assist with that. You may be on ECMO device, maybe on heart pump. They'll obviously have pacers that are placed in there with along the heart implanted to assist with that. A lot of things are going on in that first 24 to 48 hours just to make sure the heart itself is functioning properly. Now, after that and post that, the recovery kind of gets back to a similar place of the LVAD or any other open heart surgery. There are going to be certain sternal precautions for sure that you're going to have to watch out for. There'll be various things that pop up, such as after a huge surgery like transplant, sometimes the kidneys have a little bit of difficulty, quote, waking up, getting back to working. It's kind of a matter of balancing that heart itself, keeping it functioning properly, getting it paced properly and working as it should, monitoring that while also watching those other organs, making sure those other organs aren't kind of put into shock, if you will, by the transplant itself. There's no question it is an extremely difficult surgery to go through. It is and can be a very difficult recovery, but it's certainly doable, okay? Again, the main precaution there after you get out of that little period of making sure everything's running right is watching those other organs, balancing those things, and then keeping up with those sternal precautions, which you're not going to be out running any races right off the bat, not going to be out lifting weights in the gym or anything. No one would. They're going to be there wanting to rest anyway as you get through that process. Now, keep in mind your body also is going through a tremendous recovery within itself on the inside. No matter how good you may feel on the outside, like I was up walking by the very next morning. I was walking 3 and 4 miles by the end of that same week, which is extremely good. But at the same time, I had to keep reminding myself that my body within itself is going through a tremendous amount of healing on the inside. That took a lot of energy out of me. I couldn't understand why, even though I could walk 4 miles, why the stamina was not there. The long-term stamina wasn't there. The body was healing. So the recovery can be difficult, and it is much different for everyone. I've seen people who've really struggled. I've seen people like myself who have been blessed to do absolutely great in that, and that come about very quickly, but it is very different. Now, as far as being immunosuppressed, I may have already mentioned this a little bit. You're not completely without an immune system. I know that's kind of the theory. That's kind of the idea out there, but it's just not the case. I've done entire videos on that. I'll try to link up here in the corners in the description below as well, but that's not really the case. Your immune system is suppressed, and depending on whether or not you're a week out, a month out, a year out, those levels of suppression will change, and as they adapt and adjust those medications, what they're going to ultimately try to do is get your immune system back up as high as they can possibly get it without causing your body to potentially reject that new organ. That's your big fight really for your whole life from now on, but particularly within inside of that first year or so is the prevention of rejection, where the body actually sees the new organ, in this case a heart, as a foreign entity and wants to destroy it. That's what happens. And so those immunocompromising drugs, all those immunotherapeutic type drugs, anti-rejection drugs, if you will, they're all being used for that purpose. And it takes a while to get those tweaked, and there's going to be a lot of side effects, a lot of difficulties, a lot of struggles that come up as a result of just being on those medications as they monitor those things. There'll be a number of biopsies that come about. There'll be biopsies probably in the beginning every week, then bi-weekly, then monthly, then bi-monthly, all the way up to 6 months and a year. And there's just a lot to go through. I'm not arguing that, but I really do think it is a much better outcome, a much better opportunity, if you will, to ultimately have that transplant. So if she's got an LVAD, as she does, 63 years old with an LVAD, blessing within itself. That's great. If she's doing okay on that LVAD to the point that you would even ask the question, should we kind of stick with this or should we look for transplant? That is a tremendous blessing within itself. But I would say in almost any case, particularly at her age, she's actually a young whippersnapper in the world of transplant now. I would say look for that transplant, to begin to fight for that transplant, try to get it sooner rather than later, and just be thankful that she's doing as well as she is right now on the LVAD. It's completely doable. I know a lot of people who are older, if you will, and I mean by that, they're older than I am. I'm 40. Am I 48 or 49? Something like that. Had my transplant at 38. But I know a number of people, such as those two examples earlier, the man who was 72, the one who was also 75, they did absolutely great. Their immune systems were not even much of a problem. When you're a very newborn baby, your immune system already is not that strong. As you get older, the immune system is not that strong. So there's not as much combativeness, or if you will, fight that comes into that. And so they don't have to give as much immunosuppressant drugs in some cases. So you don't even have as many side effects. It can be even easier, what I'm saying, for a person of her age or even much older. So I would suggest, my opinion, I think it's basically what you're hearing in the transplant groups as a nutshell. Number one, we're all different. Number two, however, it's absolutely doable and absolutely worth it. And what it really comes down to is you basing your decision both on outlook as well as outcome. What is your outlook? If your outlook is, I want to live as long as I possibly can and enjoy life in the best way I can, I don't think there's any other argument for it. Transplant is the way to go about and do that, because not only can that get you past that, what that LVAD might potentially offer, which might be, 5, 6, 7, 8 years kind of max. This will get you far beyond that. You might get 15, 20, 25. There are people right now knocking again on the door of the 40-year mark for having a transplant, and that's doable. Lifespans are like that now, and that's even doable with technology and medications as they are. So I would look at the outlook, and then I would look at the outcome. What is the outcome? The outcome is the surgery will be hard, okay? The recovery will be difficult, but it's not much worse than what she's dealt with in her life already, I can assume, and it's certainly doable. She'll need a tremendous amount of support from you, John, from other family members if they're available. You're going to be there. You're going to be the encourager. You're going to be the advocate. You're going to be the person that stands in and stands up for her. At times, be a tremendous amount of support. But I know you and her together, along with God and much prayers that we're going to offer up on your behalf, can absolutely do this. So that's kind of my 2 cents. Maybe as long as the video was, that might be my 10 cents in this. It's absolutely doable. I'll be cheering you on the whole way. And this will be a wonderful, wonderful thing for you in the near future. So I say to you, John, to your wife, and to everyone else possibly watching this video, as I always do, stay stronger, my friends.